When I say police brutality, you may picture Eric Garner getting choked to death in Staten Island. You might picture Walter Scott getting shot in the back in South Carolina as he ran away unarmed. You might picture Laquan McDonald, who we just heard about, getting shot 16 times, many while he was on the ground as he moved away from the police. You might picture LeVar Jones in South Carolina getting pulled over at a gas station for allegedly not wearing a seatbelt. And when asked for his license and registration, he reached into his car and was shot. You might picture Charles Kinsey, a therapist in Florida, shot on the ground while trying to help a patient. You might picture a high school student in South Carolina getting body slammed in class by a school resource officer. You might picture many of the people who we have seen on video killed, like Philando Castile in Minnesota after a traffic stop. You might picture a man in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, being shot in the back while kneed on the ground face down. The reason you might picture these horrific incidents of police brutality and conjure up those images is because of the increased technology availability and ubiquity of video technology that has allowed citizens across America to become documentarians and videographers, bringing into American living rooms the horror that has existed for many years, but many people have not known about, of state-sanctioned violence, particularly in communities of color. Whereas my generation really had one video to prove this kind of violence, that of Rodney King, this generation feels like it has a Rodney King video every month, maybe every week. And the powerful story that that is told, and the way that that has essentially put police brutality and violence at the forefront of many discussions, even on the presidential campaign trail, is quite remarkable. Now, recognizing the power of video, the ACLU, as was just mentioned, has created a mobile justice app through most of its affiliates. Quite simply, it allows people to record the police, monitor them through video, enter information into an app about what they're seeing, broadcast a location to other mobile just app users, and upload that video instantaneously to the ACLU for review. It also includes Know Your Rights information. So it has connected the civil rights community to the community itself that is getting over-policed. And it was designed initially to monitor the abusive stop and frisk practices by the NYPD. Now, I'm going to pivot, however, because there is much that is good about the mobile justice app, and we can talk more about that, and much that's good about the videography that we've seen on police brutality. But when I see those videos, I think about everything that is not being videotaped. I think about all of the injustices that are happening every day, far more frequently than police killings, that is not moving the American people because it's not riveting, it's not being captured in these kind of searing moments that we've seen. So for instance, when I say excessive sentencing, you probably don't picture somebody. You don't think of a video. You probably don't think about my client, Douglas Duncans, who I represent in a clemency petition. Douglas was 26 years old when he was arrested in Fort Worth, Texas, for being part of a crack cocaine conspiracy. It was 1992. He'd been part of the conspiracy for about 2 years. It wasn't a particularly large conspiracy, probably made $150,000 over the 2-year period. Douglas had no prior federal convictions. He had no prior felony convictions. He had no prior violent convictions. He wasn't accused of a crime of violence. He had 2 prior state misdemeanors for petty theft when he was 19 and 20, versions of shoplifting. Despite the fact that he was being convicted of a nonviolent crime with no federal record, because of our drug sentencing laws, he was given a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, there was no videotape to document his sentencing, just like there was no riveting videotape documenting when Congress passed mandatory sentencing laws and decided that we're going to punish people in the drug war, which has failed miserably, based not on their culpability, but rather on the quantity of drugs with which the conspiracy that they're connected to could be accounted for. Now, that policy of mandatory minimum sentencing has driven up our prison population manyfold. And there are thousands and thousands of people like Douglas whose stories are very difficult to tell, and they're very difficult to get people riveted by. When I say juvenile justice, you may not picture a video. You may not picture one person or a name. You probably don't picture Kevin Boyd, an ACLU client who lived in Michigan. It was 1994. He was 16 years old. His parents had recently, they'd been divorced about 6 years. And his mother came to him one day with her boyfriend and said, "I want the keys to your father's apartment because I want to kill him." Kevin was 16, always looking for his mother's approval. He gave her the keys, and he did not report her threat to the police. When he went to his father's house the next day, he found his father dead. He'd been murdered. He immediately called authorities. So for that role in his crime, Kevin at 16, having not actually killed his father, under Michigan law at the time, was given a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole. Wasn't videotaped. His story really hasn't been told. These are things happening in courtrooms as we speak around the country. When I talk about the criminalization of poverty or over-criminalization, do you picture a video? Do you picture a person or a name? You probably don't think about the clients that I represented when I was a public defender in the Bronx. Like an old woman suffering from stomach cancer, missing most of her teeth, who was thrown in jail because she was asking for change outside of a bank. You probably don't think about a high school student who used his student subway metro card on election day when it wasn't supposed to be used, and for that, he was thrown in jail. You probably don't think about the woman selling flowers on Valentine's Day or the man selling bottled water in mid-July, thrown in jail because they did so without a vendor's license. You probably don't think about the 47-year-old woman with no criminal record on her way to work on a subway car. I should mention, by the way, that all of these people are people of color. She was sitting across from a man who made her uncomfortable, so she switched subway cars while the train was in motion. For that, she was arrested, thrown in the back of a police car, put in jail for more than a day. You probably don't think about the countless people that I represented arrested for trespassing in their own building. When I talk about pretrial detention, you probably don't picture Octavius Burks, another ACLU client in Mississippi, who on 3 separate occasions was arrested for a felony, never charged, never given a lawyer, and eventually released, but not before he had spent 3 out of 5 years in pretrial detention. Again, uncharged. These stories are happening around the country, but they are much harder to tell. And they don't grip us like those police videos, but they are part of the criminal justice system. They are what account largely for the travesty that is the fact that we have the largest criminal justice system in the world, and we are the most punitive. And indeed, it's a context through which those police shootings happen. They are interconnected. I think that they actually create the space for police taking the lives that we've seen on videos, because the devaluation of black life and the devaluation of the lives of the poor are not limited to those instances when we see people shot. They happen when we herd millions of people into cages. They happen when we over-criminalize communities. They happen when we give people sentences that are astronomically longer than they need to be. And so I think the challenge for storytelling is, how do we rivet the country? How do we kind of galvanize a movement like we have seen around police reform, protests, riots, marches, nonstop news segments, which I think is great, but around these other issues? How do you tell the story of the fact that we have over 3,200 people incarcerated for life without parole for nonviolent offenses? How do you tell the story that we jail people pre-trial solely because they're too poor to make bail, a result of which our pre-trial unconvicted incarcerated population would be the 4th largest prison population in the world? How do you get CNN to tell a story of our indigent defense system in shambles, such that people are not getting zealous representation when they're hauled into court, the kind that you and I would deserve and expect, and some people, many people, are not getting lawyers at all. This is a challenge, is how do we tell that story in a way that makes people care and builds a movement around what is really the bulk of our criminal justice tragedy. I think there is a moment now to do that, but I really pose it more as a question, because I've been doing this work for a long time, and I haven't exactly found the answers. The ACLU does a lot of work on all of these issues. We write substantial reports, we do a lot of litigation, we are lobbying in legislatures, and we do some communications work. But my fear is that story is not being told with the kind of urgency and immediacy that we see with the police shootings. Maybe it's not possible, but I'm really here to ask, is it, and if so, how? Because we have a moment now, and if we really want to make the kind of seismic shift in criminal justice policy that we need to make, if we want to reduce our nation's prison population from 2.3 million to something more akin to where we were 40 years ago, which is drastically reduced, if we want to restore humanity and dignity to the poor communities that are swept up and punished by our criminal justice system, then we have to figure out how to tell these stories more dramatically and with more immediacy. If we don't, my fear is that while there has been movement on police reform, that in the future we are going to say the words mass incarceration or over-criminalization, and we are going to still think of one thing and one thing only, and that is the American criminal justice system. Thank you.